Ethics Untangled is made by the Idea Centre at the University of Leeds. It's a podcast about the difficult ethical questions we face in everyday life. In each episode, I interview someone, usually a philosopher, who's spent time thinking through one of these questions, and we try between us to work out what's going on. After time in the army and the fire service, Simon Cassin became a health and safety professional and is now the managing director of a training and development consultancy called, appropriately enough, Ouch. Unusually for someone working in health and safety, he's dedicated some serious study to understanding the deep philosophical ideas underlying the profession, focusing particularly on the idea of harm. When do consequences caused or made worse by work become harm? What are an organisation's responsibilities regarding harm? And what are the responsibilities of health and safety professionals as individuals related to harm and to doing good? Simon Cassin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Great. So we're going to talk about the health and safety sector and the way the health and safety sector kind of currently deals with ethics. And we're going to cover a couple of elements of that, I suppose. We might talk a bit about health and safety people as professionals and what that entails. And we're also going to get onto this idea of the concept of harm and what does harm mean for health and safety professionals and what are the responsibilities of health and safety professionals with regard to harm. So that's what we're going to try and chat about today. But I wondered if, first of all, you could just start by telling me a bit about who you are and your background and why you got interested in the ethics of health and safety.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so sort of brief sort of background. I mean, I was in the army for a bit, and then I was in the fire service for many years, about 17 years, something like that. And I was first sort of introduced to the idea of ethics within the fire service. So I finished as a station officer in the fire service. And we went off to the fire service college and had various training courses and whatnot. And they did spend some time talking about operational decision making and the way that we provide a service to the community and servants. The fire service serves the local community, and that's all members of the community, and we should treat people with dignity and respect and fairness. And I found that really interesting and really important, and it really informed my practice as a fire officer. And I get the feeling that other fire officers felt the same way. That they were kind of doing something, serving society. So that sort of stuck with me. And then I was involved in an accident at work, so I had to sort of I wasn't well for a little bit, and then I had to reinvent myself and. I found there was a sort of natural fit in the health and safety world. So did, your normal sort of academic qualifications, sort of diploma, and then I went to Portsmouth University and did a bit more there. So, yeah, and for about over 20 years now, I've been running a training and consultancy, helping people with various sort of health and safety issues and training qualifications and whatnot. My background regarding sort of ethics, about 10 years ago, I realised there's a lot of talk in the health and safety industry about a thing called behavioural safety and human factors and, really trying to understand the psychology and, well, why do people do this when really the best issue would have been to do that? There's lots of people out there who are contributing to that and are doing some great work. And I thought I needed to know a bit more about that because I read the books and stuff, but, I felt I was ignorant, really. So I did, the Open University had a really great degree where basically you spent 3 years on psychology and 3 years on philosophy. The way I did it, I did the psychology first and then I went on to the philosophy. And obviously part of the philosophy was ethics. It got me thinking that, well, almost everything that we do, not everything, involves some kind of value judgment. If I do that, it's good. If I do that, it's bad. Well, that must be rooted in some kind of morality or ethical standards or ethical point of view. So that fascinated me, and I started looking at the practice of health and safety and education and whatnot. Sort of my sort of daily activities. And then I thought, again, I need to know more. I looked around the industry and I couldn't find anybody, in my opinion, who had any formal sort of study of ethics and was talking about it in a way that that seemed meaningful and sort of helpful, really. So then I found an applied and professional ethics master's course at Leeds and went to that. And I thought that was fantastic. And a couple of years on that. And it's given me a better understanding. And my understanding and my point of view has evolved throughout that time and will continue to evolve. And I think there's a real need, I think, within the health and safety profession, if it is a profession, to understand applied ethics rather than say, well, deontological views won't work all the time and consequentialism won't work and virtue ethics, well, maybe that's the way forward. I don't think there is this understanding of applied ethics and professional ethics. Well, I'm not saying everybody doesn't understand, but there's not a general understanding, and that's where I'm interested, really.
Brilliant. Okay. So can you just tell us a bit about what actually is health and safety? Like, how does the health and safety profession, or how do health and safety functions within organizations currently work?
Well, obviously, different size organizations, some organizations do what we would probably all agree are more dangerous activities than others. So the way it works really is we have, say in a small business, we might have managers or supervisors and employees, and they may be supported by, it might be an internal person, but more often than not, it's an external consultant who comes in and helps them understand their duties under the law and can give them advice and techniques and examples of policies and procedures and whatnot. So the managers themselves are kind of doing it on a daily basis, shall we say. And then you've got your bigger organizations, or your organizations which are perhaps what we might say carry out more dangerous activities. And they might have an in-house health and safety person, and that's their job. That's what they do. And the bigger organizations can have whole teams of people who do it. But also a thing to recognize is the health and safety profession is very broad, because we can have some people who will just specialize in things such as noise, and you'll have other people who look at issues such as asbestos or machinery hazards. And then it's quite a broad church, I would say that most people who do health and safety as part of that's what they do, a large amount are what I would call general practitioners. So they cover a wide variety of issues and provide support to the business.
Okay, that's interesting. So there's interesting to draw a distinction between health and safety officers who are, as you say, in-house, so employed by their organization, and then others who work as consultant. I wonder if there's a difference between how you see your role when you're employed directly by the organization that you're giving advice to, as opposed to, acting as an external consultant with perhaps a little bit more independence. I wonder if is that relevant?
I think it is relevant. I think it's relevant in a couple of ways, but one of the ways is if it's your sort of 9 to 5 job, shall we say, then obviously there are different pressures than if you're a consultant. It's easier if you're a consultant to go, well, it's not really working out with this customer, so whilst we all want good clients, we're just going to say, well, I'm not going to work with them anymore. I'm going to work over here, But I think the thing to understand is that when you're a consultant, or you're providing training, or whatever, you're providing a product. It is your skills and knowledge and experience and whatnot. That's a product that you're selling. When you're in-house, I think it's, whilst it's still that knowledge and experience or whatever, I think that's different. I think maybe you are approaching it from a slightly different way than if you're an external consultant.
Yeah, okay. And how does this relate to the idea of health and safety officers' status as professionals? So do you think they should be thinking of themselves as professionals, and in what sense?
obviously different people will have a different view of what have you got to be a professional. And I would say that if we're looking at things like, do we have a professional body with a code of conduct? Yes, we do. We have that. As there's certain grades of membership that relate to experience and academic standards. It's not unusual to see people who are health and safety practitioners. We'll decide whether they're professionals in a moment, to have master's degrees and even studying PhDs. And there are a lot of people with recognized qualifications. So I think broadly speaking, they meet that. Now, I think one of the interesting things as well is, I'm what's called a chartered member of the Institute of Occupational Health and Safety. And as a chartered member, chartership is allocated or given by the Privy Council. One of the things that it says there, it says that your primary responsibility as a chartered association, chartered organisation, is to society, which seems to align with my sort of general understanding of professions serving the needs of society.
Yeah, that's typically what set of professions that they have this kind of dual set of responsibilities, I suppose. On the one hand, they have ethical responsibilities towards their clients, but then on the other hand, they have ethical responsibilities towards the public. Interesting to think about how that plays out in the health and safety space, right? Because you're advising a particular organization, so you've kind of got a direct responsibility to kind of protect the health and safety of individuals who work for that company. But do you think health and safety officers tend to see themselves as also having that wider responsibility towards the public?
I think they would. I think it becomes obvious if, say, perhaps a health and safety officer in maybe a public venue or something, making sure access and egress and, people who come and use their facilities, whatever that might be, whether it be a sports stadium or whether it be a cinema or whatever it might be. I think what they do then, I would say, generally, the idea is that it splits that they're serving the needs of their client, and there is a very, very big focus on the protecting the workers. So it's almost like, I'm out there and I'm keeping you lot safe, almost. Is that a general sort of feeling that's what they're doing? Now, the interesting thing is, the client who pays the business, shall we say, who pays their wages or whatever, consultancy fees or whatever. An interesting question, which we probably won't have time to go into, who actually do they work for? And getting back to this society thing, does society really want its family, friends, neighbours and whatever to go to work and having some kind of terrible outcome related to their work? Society would say, well, no, we're not happy with that. That's not good enough. And so I think that over and above everything, whether it be for the individual or whether it be for the business, shall we say, the client, and also the professional body, is the greater good of society. And I do think that health and safety definitely contributes, health and safety practitioners and professionals definitely contribute to that.
Great. But you think that the health and safety profession has been under-examined from an ethical point of view, is that right?
I do, yes. And it was interesting when I was doing my studying my master's and I was thinking about my dissertation. I was talking to one of the ethicists who was supporting me, and he tried to help me find papers, ethics papers on health and safety, and he said, "Well, there's kind of almost nothing there." To say there is nothing is wrong, but to say there is stuff that is questions that have been rigorously considered either by ethicists or by the health and safety profession, it's sparse. It really is.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think that is a problem. And it's really interesting because health and safety is something that anyone who goes to work will be aware of. So why haven't we done that? It's interesting.
And what do you think are the the interesting ethical questions then that haven't received the attention that they deserve?
Well, first of all, I think we need to, if we are a profession, which I think we broadly meet that requirement. I think if we're not a profession, we're a profession like. So there we go. So I think we broadly that. So it's about, well, what are the responsibilities as a professional? And also, what is the extent of health and safety standards? How safe is safe enough? Well, that is quite an interesting question, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
do, uh, do the, and I know we may talk about this a little bit later, should people, should businesses and health and safety professionals, are they striving for no one ever being harmed at all in the workplace, ever? And I think before you can even answer questions like that, you've got to say to yourself, well, okay, what do we mean by harm? I mean, what does that mean? I mean, obviously you're an ethicist. Would you say the concept of harm is a really sort of fundamental point to get your head around before you can consider whether something is right or wrong? I mean, what do you think?
No, absolutely, and not straightforward either. So it's the kind of thing that you might think, well, it's obvious what harm is, but actually once you start to dig into it a bit, it gets a bit complex, right? So, I mean, maybe, let's get into that, right? So how does harm arise in health and safety? So, when might consequences caused or made worse by work become harm, and how does that play out in the health and safety context?
Initially, I think we just need to think about this. We're talking mainly about work, health and safety at work. That's what we're really talking about. We're not really talking about health and safety, people doing DIY or sorting out their garden or whatever. We're not really talking about that. We're talking about activities that people do and they get paid. And it also includes volunteering. That's also included in this. But they're doing some kind of activity, either for a business or even a volunteering or an organization and whatnot. So it definitely involves that. Okay. I think our understanding of harm is guided by legislation in the UK. I don't know about other countries, so I can't make a comment there, but it's guided there. And we have a thing called RIDDLE, which is a law, and basically what it says is in the UK, if you're a business, and it's called the Reporting of Injuries, Diseases and Dangerous Occurrence Regulations. And we've also got this enforcement authority, the Health and Safety Executive as well. So what does RIDDLE cover? It says, well, if you're a business and you've got certain injuries, major injuries, and there's a big list of that, but we're talking about things like broken bones and, amputations and awful injuries like that. We're obviously talking about certain types of illnesses that are caused or made worse by work, and we're also talking about fatal accidents or things that happen like that. And whereas on top of that, we're talking about someone who has been involved in an activity at work and they've been off work for more than 7 days. So that will give us some idea of what we mean by harm.
Right.
As a starting point.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you think that's not enough, right? That's not going to tell us really what harm is in the way that we need to understand it to properly kind of discharge the duties of health and safety professionals. Is that right?
Well, I do and I don't. So there you go. Right. First of all, I make this distinction between what I call safety harm, which would fall, all the bits that I've just been mentioning, motor injuries and being off work poorly and all that lot. I think, and obviously fatal accidents and serious illnesses and stuff. I definitely think that falls under safety harm. But what I don't think that we do well enough in health and safety, and I'm not really sure I'm answering your question here, but I'll go with it anyway. What I don't think we do is, I think that's a myopic view of harm, which fails to recognize harm that is happening or may happen in the workplace that might even be a result of our attempts to prevent safety harm.
Okay. Could you give an example of how that might work?
Okay. One of the things that we've become more apparent in recent years is this idea of mental health and work-related stress. Okay, so if the health and safety executive are talking about and give guidance on work-related stress, so let's look at the kind of things that might be distressing. So I think if we just park that sort of safety harm notion of harm for a moment, and we look at let's look at a notion of harm that's outside the safety industry. So, well, I was trying to find an explanations of harm, and I was looking at people like Feinberg and Perry and whatnot. And Perry describes harm as a moral concept. So Perry's saying that, well, actually, there's an element of morality in harming others or is preventing harm. And what he's saying that harm is something that is severe interference with a person's interests that influence their well-being, which is quite a lot to sort of handle there. So now, if that's the case, we can see how stress, mental health issues, but it also raises questions of things like property interests, financial interests, things like autonomy, respect, things like misuse of power, coercion, control. These are all things that would seem to have the potential to be harmful if they cause severe negative or disvalue to a person's interests. And with those interests being related to well-being, one of the problems we've got is there are so many different explanations of what we mean by well-being. And so actually knowing what that means gets a bit messy. But when you look at the health and safety executive, because I look at them and, I think they're an excellent organization that give me and people like me guidance. They're talking about well-being. They're talking about stress. In the same way as we might say, okay, sharp tools can cause harm to the body. I think we can also see that a lack of autonomy, a lack of respect, financial implications.
Right.
So one of the things that happens is that obviously I run a training organization and quite a lot of people come to us and they say, oh yeah, we've got to have this certificate before we can win the contract. Okay, but the certificate doesn't relate to what it is we're actually doing. But we have to spend time, money and effort having these things in place. Otherwise, we can't even bid for the work. So the health and safety approach is puts in these prerequisites for certain standards, which don't actually relate to what they're doing. Now, I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it does happen.
Okay.
It definitely does.
That's interesting. Yeah. So just going back to what you were saying about harm there, and you were bringing in this concept of harm from, is it Perry, that it's a kind of moralized concept and it can include all sorts of things that could impact on somebody's well-being. I suppose you might think that's going to bring in, aspects of employment and so on, which wouldn't traditionally seem to fall under the remit of health and safety, right? So, I mean, if you're thinking about kind of, I don't know, well, it might bring in things like bullying and harassment and stuff like that, which obviously, organizations tend to take very seriously, but wouldn't necessarily think of as being part of their health and safety function. But also like financial exploitation. So if you've got people on low wages, then you might think that's going to impact on their well-being in the kind of way that you've been describing. And again, seems surprising if that's going to be a health and safety concern, or maybe are you saying that we should have a really capacious definition of health and safety, which could include all of these different aspects of organizational, the well-being of employees, I suppose.
I think that's a really good point. I think we need to be very careful that we don't turn health and safety professionals or practitioners, whatever, as though they've got some kind of responsibility for solving all work-related issue, because that would be absurd, and I think it would be overly demanding. I think the way that I think about it is this, is we can understand that within an organization or business, there's different people who do different things. Yeah. So the finance department will, sort out, invoicing and tax and paying and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay. The health and safety department has its own core functions. The bit that I'm interested in is not the core function necessarily, but it's how we go about it. So would we say, if the finance department are managing income streams and invoicing and paying customers in a way that was unfair, so actually not paying invoices on time or making it very difficult for businesses for contractors to get paid. So it's not necessarily, I'm saying, that health and safety people should be responsible for all those things. Maybe some of them, some of the things, but it's health and safety has to make sure that the way it does its core functions isn't unfair, isn't abusive of power. It isn't adding unrealistic financial burdens on and time burdens and extra workload and whatnot on people who are looking to carry out their work.
Okay, that's
so
interesting.
It's not what we do. I'm not saying safety people should do everything. I'm saying it's how they do it is the interesting part. And that's where I think ethics really is relevant to the health and safety profession and all professions, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so, all right. So there's a kind of question there about kind of where are the boundaries of the health and safety professional's role, and like you're drawing attention to kind of questions about the way health and safety professionals exercise that role. The other thing, which I think you kind of already alluded to, which I thought was an interesting question, is kind of what's an acceptable level of harm, right? So, or is there any such thing as an acceptable level of harm? Should we be looking for zero harm, or is there a kind of balance or a trade-off between avoiding harm and perhaps other goods that might be important in other ways? So, yeah, what could you say a bit about that?
Yeah, so this is where it's really important to have a workable boundary of this notion of harm. If we say harm is, so if I go to work and a part of my job, the HC actually give a great example of this. They talk about people who might be carpet fitters, or people who might, spend a lot of their job mainly on their hands and knees doing their job. The HSC would say, well, okay, well, you might have a bruise, as long as we're not causing some kind of long-term, severe knee or back problem or whatever. But to finish work at the end of the day feeling a bit tired, or, that feels a bit stiff, that kind of thing, or maybe a minor cut on your hand or something like that. The HSC would say, well, okay, is that actually harm? And he don't think it is. I think it might be, I think we could argue that, there is a person is feeling in some way, has been in some way affected, but I don't think they've been affected. And we go back to that in a severely in that. I mean, does a little cut on my hand prevent me from living my life according to my interests and my well-being? I think in most cases it doesn't. I mean, the very notion of going to work, arriving at work, a full day's work, get home, work, you might feel a little bit tired, depending what you do. I'd imagine a lot of people get home when they feel tired. So are we saying that, well, okay, because you've got less energy and then we've harmed you because of that? That doesn't seem to make sense, I think. And another problem we've got is there are some occupations, obviously I was in the fire service. Are we saying that people can't carry out work that may result in some harm? Well, if that's the case, then, I mean, what about sort of police officers or firefighters or any numbers of jobs out there where actually some degree of this enormous notion of harm is going to happen just kind of doing their job? It becomes a little bit untangible and it's really not helpful. So for me, I think it's really important to go back to that severe things that are, severely impact physical, psychological, or an overall well-being. So I would say this is I would rather that we spent time making sure that people can finish work on time and being paid reasonably so that they can go and perhaps spend time with their family and whatnot, rather than investing time, money, and effort, which would mean there was less availability to do that. So if there's more red tape or more paperwork, that means the working day gets expanded to a point where it will significantly impact a person's home life or hobbies or whatever. I think what I'm trying to say here is this notion of harm isn't all things that we might consider harm. I think it has to be that severe, a significant impact.
Right, but even within that kind of category of severe harm or a significant impact, I mean, there are some jobs, right, where even that is a risk which can't be eliminated altogether. I mean, you've talked about, firefighters or police officers and so on. Unfortunately, there just are some jobs, aren't there, where people are going to be exposed to a risk of potentially severe harm, and it's not going to be possible to eliminate that risk entirely. So how does that work? Presumably we aren't saying that kind of the existence of those jobs is just morally unacceptable. So how do you kind of draw a line when it comes to kind of the acceptability of the risk of severe harm?
I think it is obviously firefighters and police officers and lots of other jobs out there, and I think to help us with this, we need to understand, well, what does society expect? What would society's view be is if we said, well, actually, we're not going to let police officers carry out their activities because they may receive some kind of injury or whatever, whether it be, sort of arresting criminals or whatever. We say, well, we don't really want you to tase the criminal because if you did, you might, hurt yourself. I think society would say, well, and it's not just those obvious occupations as well, it's other occupations. So an interesting one would be would society be prepared to pay, and this is just a made up number, 30% more for its products and services if it felt that there'd be no, what we might call minor harm to any of the people who are doing those activities? Would it be prepared to pay more, whether it either be on the railways or for example, would it be prepared to pay more taxes to make sure no one who ever works in the public service has any form of harm? I just don't think it would. I just don't think it would. So what we're after is a kind of balance. That's what we're after. And this really, I'm not saying I know the answer to this because I don't. But this is why I'm keen on the health and safety profession engaging in applied ethics to have a better understanding and a deeper conversation about, well, actually, that's safe enough. Within the law, the HSE in the UK, they use this term so far as is reasonably practicable. What they say that businesses should invest the appropriate amount of time, money and effort and inconvenience on one side that's required to achieve the right kind of benefits on the other. So if an activity is pretty dangerous and could cause terrible injuries or ill health, well, the HSE would say, well, you've got to spend more time, money and effort on that. But if it's something that is, we'll just use an example, maybe I'm not talking like a severe cut on a hand, but a scratch or something. The HSE would not expect anyone any business to spend a lot of time, money and effort on preventing that. It just wouldn't. because there is this all goes into the pot for how much we pay for our goods and services. If it costs more or to achieve that standard, then got to be paid for by somewhere along the lines, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're talking about kind of financial costs like that, it's important to keep in mind that there are trade-offs involved, right? So if you're talking about public services in particular, money that's spent on one element of public services can't be spent on something else, which is also going to have, is likely to have quite important value to somebody else. So it's not that we're just talking about money here. Money is opportunity, isn't it? So there's opportunity costs with directing money into particular areas.
Definitely, and it's not, and like I say, it's not just money. So a perfect example is if we have a public service that can support less members of the community because it takes extra time and effort to do in this pursuance of no harm, shall we say? Then the society said, well, hold on, we'd quite like more appointments at the doctors or the council or whatever. And, if you tell me you can't have more appointments because there's this process in place to prevent what we might call minor harm, well, we're not very happy with that. We'd quite like these services to be available. And so it isn't just about money. It isn't just about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then another question with regard to harm, which is interesting, is so we've mainly been talking about reducing harm. So whether it's kind of harm to the public, I suppose, or harm to professionals themselves. But is the health and safety officer's responsibility only the reduction of harm, or should they be concerned with doing good or kind of promoting health and safety beyond the reduction of harm?
Okay, so I think the thing there is I definitely believe that professionals, and if we're going with health and safety as being professionals, I definitely believe there is duty to promote the public good. I do believe that. But I think, first of all, we've got to get the harm bit right first. We've got to, and I think as a profession, I think there's still work to be done. Health and safety statistics are, some of them are more credible than others. But is it true that there are still people in workplaces out there that are actually being harmed by work? I mean, harm that anyone would say is harm. Whether it be fatal accidents or major injuries or some terrible illnesses and whatnot. I think yes, all professions, including the health and safety profession, has duties towards the public good, promoting the public good. And if we just park that for a moment, but I think that's great. But I think we need to get the other stuff right to a higher standard before we focus on that. It's almost like, if you think of it's almost like we haven't finished the day job and we work going on to something else. Now, I think that we can promote the public good alongside the primary aim of preventing harm. So what do I mean by that? So I mean that the way that we go about it, so how we go about preventing harm can, and the HSE have been talking about this for goodness knows how many years, is that involving people in making decisions about how they work. So giving them more autonomy and more able to contribute, providing them with skills and learning opportunities that can help meaningful learning opportunities. Well, that promotes the public good. I think that before we can, as a health and safety profession, I think that there are three main elements that I think we need to do. And I think we need to make sure that what we do is effective. So if we're asking people, we give advice and we say, well, we think these control measures are going to work for you. I think they need to work. I think we need to consider the efficiency in terms of time, money, and effort. Are we asking people to spend more time, money, and effort or invest in things that are not effective? Are we doing that? And I think there is that ethical side as well, is the treating people with fairness and respect. One of the things, getting back to the original question, is there are elements of health and safety which are valuable when we're not at work as well. So a classic example is first aid skills. Yeah. So could the health and safety profession, or those who focus in that area, can they make the first aid skills available to people other than their employees? And they'll do that. Could they promote that to the wider community and a wider stakeholders? I think one of the important things, just to get back to the harm thing, which is relevant to this as well, is if we only think of safety harm, it means we become myopic in terms of how we do things and who is affected. Once we have this idea of general harm, okay, that also allows us to not just think about general harm, but general good. So good to society. So once we broaden that notion of harm from just safety harm to the interest to well-being, it becomes more obvious how we can promote the good to society. If we don't have that bigger notion of harm, I think we are less able to promote the good, but also recognize where we are harming in pursuit of the good. In pursuit of avoiding harm. I don't know if I'm making any sense there. It makes sense to me, but I've been thinking about it a long time.
Yeah. It's those trade-offs, right? It's trade-offs between the public good and the prevention of harm. And I suppose what you're saying is there's no easy answers to these questions, but what you're trying to provoke the profession into doing is to just think a bit more clearly about them and a bit more rigorously, so that they can actually make those judgments about trade-offs in a more informed way.
Definitely. On the health and safety, the professional bodies have for a number of years now been talking about things like sustainability and environmental and ESG, and they're talking about adding value to not only business but to society. One of the problems we've got is that we generally use words other than the words ethics, and if we don't use the word ethics and we call it something else, then I don't think we think about a wider element of duties and ethical duties and responsibilities. So a really interesting one is so when we talk about sustainability, we talk about, well, okay, if we act in a trustworthy way, if we treat people fairly, we'll make more money. Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. I'm not saying making money is a bad thing, because it isn't, in my opinion, anyway. But the point I'm trying to say is it just turns what we do into consequentialism. And as we know, there are big problems if we say, well, if we argue, if you do this, or do this thing because it will give you good consequences, we could also argue, do this thing over here, which most people would see would be actually an unethical or bad thing, if it gives you good consequences. So if we're focusing too much on consequences rather than how we're achieving those consequences, and we forget that part of the discussion, or we don't even have it, then there is a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem, not just for the health and safety profession, but within business ethics in general. Be good because you'll get more customers. We're not saying that's a bad thing, but there's something, when we talk about be ethical, it's something different than that, isn't it? It is something else that perhaps we need to build up our vocabulary and our understanding to have that broader discussion.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm definitely in favour of using the word ethics more. So that's probably a good point at which to leave the conversation. Thank you so much, Simon Cassin. That was really interesting.
thank you very much. Yeah, and thanks for inviting me on today's session. So thank you very much, Jim.
If you enjoyed this episode of Ethics Untangled, please like and subscribe and recommend us to your friends. The podcast is edited by Mark Smith at Leeds Media Services, and our music is by Kate Wood. Ethics Untangled is brought to you by the Idea Centre, a specialist unit for teaching, research, training and consultancy in applied ethics at the University of Leeds. We offer master's programmes in healthcare ethics and applied and professional ethics, and PhDs available full or part-time and face-to-face or by online learning. We also offer consultancy and training services for business and the professions, including help with the difficult ethical issues faced by your organisation, commissioned research projects, and online or face-to-face CPD. If you'd like to find out more about these or any of our other activities, please visit our website at ahc.leeds.ac.uk/ethics.